A blast at the Abu Bakr Siddiq Mosque in Kabul's northwest district killed at least 21 people, leaving 33 others injured. The explosion is said to have occurred when people were offering evening prayers at the Kharkiv area mosque. An Italian non-governmental organization which operates a hospital in Kabul said that it had received 27 victims, including 3 fatalities, and most of the patients suffered from shell and burn injuries. Reports suggest that the mosque cleric was among the dead, while the injured victims included children as young as a 7-year-old. Taliban government spokesman confirmed the deaths and added that the perpetrators will soon be punished.
Russia continued to target civilians on Wednesday with deadly strikes here in the eastern city of Kharkiv. This one hit a dormitory, which included homes for retirees and children. Ukrainian President Zelensky called it a cynical attack on civilians coming from a powerless aggressor. With Moscow getting support from a few Latin American nations, Zelensky on Wednesday appealed to the rest of that region for the first time, telling Chilean students to spread the truth about the conflict to counter what he called Moscow's propaganda. Meanwhile, a third bomb blast this week in Crimea, the first military action there since the start of the conflict, has forced a mass evacuation. Zelensky says tens of thousands of Russians are now streaming out of Crimea, heading back to Russia.
Slovakia has already delivered artillery and air defense to Ukraine. Now the EU member wants to transfer several fighter jets to its invaded neighbor, but according to a survey, only half of the Slovak population supports these arms deliveries. Among the EU's eastern members, Slovaks have the strongest pro-Russian sentiment. A third of the population still sees Russia as a strategic partner and the US as a threat, despite Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. In autumn, Minister Nutt wants to hand over Slovakia's MiG-29 fighter fleet to Ukraine on condition that Bratislava receives compensation of 300 million euros.
After years of turbulence, a major diplomatic breakthrough for both nations. The office of Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid announced the news following a phone call with his Turkish counterpart, President Erdogan. Both parties agreeing to return ambassadors to each other's countries. Turkey, a long-time supporter of Palestinian rights, promised the decision did not mean Ankara would abandon its support for Palestinians. Once allies, diplomatic ties crumbled between Ankara and Tel Aviv after the passenger vessel, the Mavi Marmara, tried to breach Israel's naval blockade of the Gaza Strip in 2010. Part of a flotilla aimed at delivering aid to Gaza, the deadly confrontation resulted in the deaths of 9 civilians.
Mali has asked the UN Security Council for an emergency meeting to stop what it describes as acts of aggression by France in the form of violations of its sovereignty, support for jihadist groups and espionage. The Malian Ministry of Foreign Affairs distributed Wednesday to journalists a letter addressed by the head of diplomacy, Abdoulaye Diop, to the Chinese presidency of the Security Council. Mali reserves the right to use self-defense if French actions persist, in accordance with the UN Charter, the minister said. Mr. Diop denounced in the letter what was described as the repetitive and frequent violations of the national airspace by French forces and the flights of French aircraft engaged in activities considered as espionage and attempts to intimidate.
The man accused of stabbing Salman Rushdie has spoken out. In an interview with the New York Post, the 24-year-old Hadi Matar said that he respected Iran's former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, but did not say if he was inspired to attack the author because of a fatwa issued by Khomeini. Matar further said that he had only read a couple of pages of Rushdie's controversial novel, The Satanic Verses, the same book over which Iran's former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, had issued an edict calling for Rushdie's death in 1989. Referring to Rushdie himself, Matar had said that he didn't like him very much. Matar told the Post that he had watched YouTube videos of Rushdie speaking and called the author disingenuous. Matar said that a tweet announcing the author's visit to New York State gave him the idea of going to the event.
Tonight, mass arrests in El Salvador continue. The country's president, Nayib Bukele, doubling down on what he has called a war on gangs. The government announcing that at least 50,000 people have been arrested since late March. Arrests that they have then touted across social media for months, using the hashtag war against gangs, and taking to Twitter yet again, this time to say the exception has made it possible to intensify the war against gangs and get thousands of terrorists off the streets.
Over 1% of the Salvadoran population has been detained under the state of emergency and is being held without basic rights to defense.
This week, Congress extending a state of emergency that was put into place back in March. The decision following a bloody weekend where more than 80 people were killed.
Thailand has been hit with a series of arson and bomb attacks. Authorities say there were explosions and fires in at least 70 different areas, which left 7 people injured on Wednesday. The attacks were aimed at gas stations and convenience stores in the Patani, Yala and Narathiwat provinces. Although the attacks appear to be connected, no one has yet claimed responsibility. This comes as the 3 affected provinces and parts of a 4th have witnessed low-level insurgency against the Thai government since the 1960s.
After a slow overnight crawl, Artemis is now on the launch pad, the most powerful rocket ever, ready for a new chapter in human exploration.
It's a future where NASA will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon.
But first, this critical uncrewed test flight set for August 29th. Artemis will carry the Orion crew capsule, speeding to a 42-day mission orbiting the moon. If the flight goes well, humans could orbit the moon within 2 years. Then a moon landing in 25 or 2026, an orbiting lunar space station and moon base before going on to Mars.